Hey everyone, welcome to Hit the Apex podcast. It's Jawad here as always, and thank you for tuning in this week. Coming to you a little later than normal. Decided to actually take a proper day off on Thursday. Was a little bit under the weather, but also was nice to just spend the day relaxing with my partner. Headed to the markets, had a nice lunch. And then just by the time I got home, it was more like siesta hour than podcast hour. So thought, why not leave it till Sunday to record this one? Maybe let some of my thoughts from the last weekend marinate a little bit more from the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, but also kind of act as a preview for next weekend too, because can you believe it? After 2 years, we're going to have Formula One racing back in Australia, so very exciting that. So excited to confirm all of my plans and whereabouts for next weekend too. So it's been a busy week, as I say always. But anyway, let's get into it. And some supercars as well to talk about later with the Tassie SuperSprint last weekend. But going to F1, I think coming a bit later this time has helped kind of settle the negative feelings I had associated with last weekend quite a bit. So as much as we had an amazing race, another great battle between Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, first time pole sitter. It was pretty much dominated by the fact that, there was a bombing nearby to the track, and whenever you think that happens, you instantly think terrorist attack or, the security and safety of everyone involved in that part of the world. And, the Formula One people as well, they're there to do a sport, basically, doing what they love, essentially. It was basically a lot of questions being asked, about the ethics, the morals of Formula One for continuing to want to visit this part of the world and everything. And of course, it's easy to use the line of, they pay more for a race than any other country does. What they're doing and what they're providing for the sport financially is quite significant, and then, of course, the sponsor that Formula One has, one of their chief sponsors in Aramco, which, coincidentally, it was their processing facility or whatever that was attacked by Houthi rebels from Yemen. They're supposedly assisting F1 in the future of developing synthetic fuel and all that sort of thing. So, you've got all these arguments that F1 can make and say that, it's beneficial for racing in this part of the world. Stefano Domenicali even comes out, the CEO of F1, and says, we're actually here to create a positive impact, perhaps change the culture, and I just giggle a little bit at that thought because, without being too forward, I feel like, it's probably not possible to achieve what they're thinking to the degree that, we would like it to be. All us people watching from the outside in who, care very much about human rights and equality and that sort of thing. So who knows? And, good on the GPDA as well over the weekend. They deliberated long and hard. There was a 4-hour meeting apparently, on Friday before FP2 started to assess whether it would be safe enough to race. And, they were given all the assurances and everything, and they proceeded with the weekend. What will happen in the future? Who knows? Whether F1 will decide to say, look, it's got a bit too dicey last time. We're not going to come back. I don't think that's a possibility, given how much money is involved. At the end of the day, cash is king. especially for a business like Formula One. So as much as it pains me to say, it's not going to be something that they're going to take a leaf out of, our ethical playbook, or, take our morals into account and be like, okay, we can't do it. I mean, credit to them for acting on Russia, after invading Ukraine. That was not going to be viable at all, and especially, with two countries being at war. But how much different is this, essentially? So, without getting too political, I've made my thoughts clear on this. I don't feel comfortable with the fact that, they are increasing their presence in that part of the world where, they've got so many different countries lining up to want to get a Grand Prix. Domenicali as well, talking about the potential, not saying definitely there's going to be 30 races, but the potential of, having 30 Grand Prix a season, not that that's going to happen anytime before the next Concord Agreement is signed, obviously, with 24 races being the limit in that instance. So it's just a lot of questions. I feel like, we leave the Saudi weekend having asked of ourselves and, the sport and whatnot. But at the end of the day, as sad as it is, I feel like nothing is going to change in that instance. So let's leave it at that. This is in no way me ignoring the realities and whatnot about it. It's something I'm very conscious of, and, outside of podcasting and writing and everything, personally, I feel very strongly about this subject. So yeah, we'll talk about the racing and stuff now. So Charles Leclerc obviously dominated the practice sessions, but it was Checo Perez who, shocked in qualifying for pole position, got his first career pole in F1, something, he had the record, or holds the record now, of most races competed without a pole position, or until he gets his first pole position. So good on Checo for that. Really came under the radar. Other highlights from qualifying, or not really highlights, but really, really lowlights, you could say, was the massive crash for Mick Schumacher in Q2. Thankfully, Mick was okay, taken to hospital. But again, we talk about Saudi Arabia potentially being unsafe as a country to race because of what's going on politically and, just in terms of conflict around it. But then the track itself, we only raced here not long ago at the end of last year. We saw so many incidents in the junior categories in Formula 2 and stuff like that happen again this weekend. And then we have a big crash like this in Formula 1 with Mick Schumacher and the Haas car pretty much being written off for the weekend, what could have been as well, given how quick they are at the moment. And then them basically saying it was $1 million worth of damage as well. So they'll rue the fact that, they had a missed opportunity with Mick, but at the same time, it's so important that Mick is okay and was able to return to the track on Sunday to talk to the press and answer some questions and all that. So it'll be good to see him in the following race in Melbourne. So we look forward to that. We had Lewis Hamilton eliminated in Q1 as well, while George Russell, kind of bit underrated, but was the star of the weekend in terms of Mercedes and Mercedes-powered cars. He was the fastest in qualifying, with 6th in the end in Q3, but Hamilton just not having a good weekend at all. It was his worst weekend since he came to Mercedes in terms of qualifying and race finishes. He also took the record over the weekend of having the most Grand Prix contested with a single team, taking over from Michael Schumacher's record of 179 races with Ferrari, so 180 races for old Louis for Mercedes, but it was easily the worst weekend that they had, qualifying down in 16th and then I think only coming in for 10th in the end. So as for the race itself, we saw Perez open the stint, or lead the opening stint, quite comfortably. All looking good there for Checo. A lot of questions about Checo as well, of course. Will he hang on to his seat for another year? Can he really be that, support driver for Max in terms of, or not just for Max, but for Red Bull to get that Constructors' Championship that they couldn't do last year. But unfortunately, he was cruelled in the first round of pit stops. So Red Bull were dummied into pitting by Ferrari on lap 16. All would have been well, it wouldn't have really taken him too far out of contention, only for the fact that there was a safety car that came out at the end of that lap, or through that lap. Nicholas Latifi unfortunately having another crash. He crashed out during Q1 as well, and then of course crashing out during the race, so not a clean weekend for the Williams driver. And this basically, with the safety car out, allowed cheap pit stops for Leclerc, for Max Verstappen, for Carlos Sainz. Ferrari, you see it in their demeanour this year, the aggression to double stack and get both cars back on the track in a good way. Sainz was pretty unhappy with Checo for a pit exit overtake, so as Sainz was coming out of the pits, Checo thought he could pass even though they were under safety car conditions, but the positions were reverted eventually with that. So that was another thing about the stewarding this year. Apparently race control are not gonna, or the race director himself is not going to communicate to teams that if he doesn't hand back that position, he's going to be given a penalty. I think it's more so like they've got to understand for themselves that they're in the wrong. So there's a bit more homework required for the drivers in this instance, and also for the teams to keep an eye out on. Otherwise, there would be penalties applied. So they were able to swap the positions back. So Checo down in fourth, essentially. Feel so much for him because, to having led the first stint comfortably as he did, and then to be cruelled by a pit stop like that, that's just, the way Formula One works, unfortunately, as does any sport. So he missed out there, down in fourth. The race pretty much ran, in procession in the middle part for the leaders. We saw some good battles in between there. You had the Alpine drivers, Fernando Alonso, Esteban Ocon fighting each other. You had Lewis Hamilton trying to get into the top 10. He was having a go at Kevin Magnussen, who's been sensational, given his late call-up to return to the sport after a year out. So great battles going on, and ultimately, another glowing review of the new regulations and how, these cars are able to follow each other much closely. Last year, if, you made a pass on someone, it would be very unlikely that they would be able to get back past you. So, the battle, or, if you're jostling for positions or whatever, for example, it's not all done and dusted once the move is done. There is a possibility that the other driver's going to get back past. So it can go on for some time, like we saw in Bahrain, and we saw the same thing towards the end of the race. So first we had a virtual safety car with under 10 laps to go. 3 separate cars having 3 separate mechanical or, technical failures, all pull over to the side of the track in different parts. You had Daniel Ricciardo losing out there, chance for points for him in McLaren as well. Fernando Alonso, despite having that great battle with his teammate Ocon as well, he crawled to the side of the track and was out. And also Valtteri Bottas as well, who put in another good qualifying for Alfa Romeo, so losing key points there. So you had all 3 of those cars basically on their own accord just come to the side of the track. Ricciardo was probably in more of a hairier position given that he stopped at the entry to the pits, which actually hurt Hamilton, unfortunately, because he was on for a top 7 finish, you could say. But unfortunately, because he hadn't pitted up until that point, he went quite long on the hard tyres, 41 laps to be precise. He had to wait until the pit lane was open again, because they had to close it with Ricciardo in the way, so he didn't end up getting a penalty like he did in Monza a couple of years ago. So you had all those guys out. You had Max and Leclerc on the restart be able to fight with each other. You had Max going around the outside of Leclerc on the back straight. Then Leclerc on the following lap going into turn 1 and 2, the chicane, was able to get that position back. You had them lock up at the end of the final, end of the next lap on the final hairpin as well. Max getting a bit testy as he does, getting a bit aggro under the helmet and on the team radio. But he was able to take the lead on lap 47. So, that was a great little back and forth again, like we saw in Bahrain between those two. And, just the composure that both drivers had. I say Max got testy, but he didn't try to pull anything stupid like he did last year in the same race against Lewis Hamilton. So he was all good. Leclerc was great too. And then in the end, the Red Bull beating the Ferrari by, not even half a second or just over half a second. Closest finish since Monza 2020. So when Pierre Gasly beat Carlos Sainz across the line there. And, whoa, this is shaping to be really good. I know we're only 2 races into a long season, but just what we've seen so far, like I said earlier, between the midfield as well, the fact that, you make an overtake, that the game's not over. The fact that, the other driver can have a chance to get back at him, at his rival, pretty much straight away, is a testament as to how good these cars are. We'll still hear criticism about, you hear criticism about anything in Formula One, as I keep saying, and I laugh about it, but also get riled up pretty quickly as well when I hear people criticising F1 for certain things. I mean, criticism is due where it's due for certain things, and, I won't shy away from talking about that sort of stuff. But when it comes to the racing side now and the regulations for 2022, this is what Formula One needed. This is what is great. You're not having to rely just on DRS to make overtakes. This is 2 different cars from 2 different manufacturers, different power units, different aero philosophies or whatever, fighting for the lead and being able to, one car overtakes the other car can get back into the lead on the next lap, basically go for a couple of laps. It is phenomenal, and you might always be limited by the tyres that you're on as well. That's just how motorsport works, unfortunately. But how good is this? Surely you can't find a detractor in this. If anyone does find a detractor in this, I'd like to have words with you personally, because I don't think it's valid in that instance. But seeing them both go across the line with such a short margin, it makes you think: is this what we're gonna see every race? For the rest of the year? I doubt it, because there's so many other variables involved. But for example, in 7 days' time, when we're getting ready to race at Albert Park, for example, are we going to have this sort of battle continue? And Albert Park being one of those tracks where in the past overtaking was not really easy, people hated it, it's just, complaining about the layout and yada yada. Guys, you need to come to Australia and go to Albert Park, go to the Australian Grand Prix to understand why it's actually a great race. More on that later. But if we get this sort of same battle between Leclerc and Verstappen, whether it's with Checo or with Sainz as well involved, it's so good, so exciting. And that's coming from someone who isn't, religiously a fan or a follower of either of these 2 teams or of those 2 drivers, but just as an outsider or neutral, I'm enjoying this. Like I enjoyed last year's championship battle as well, to a certain extent, before it got too dicey. So Max taking the points back, important race for him as well, given the DNF that they had in Bahrain, and for Red Bull as well to get those championship points back. Carlos Sainz, again, kind of the forgotten man in all this, finishing P3. That's actually 3 consecutive podiums for him as well. If you look back to the end of last season in Abu Dhabi, what more can you say? I think at the moment, it's very much looking like a Max versus Leclerc type battle, but Sainz could easily be someone who if he plays his cards right and stays consistent, he can be up there. He's still sitting second in the championship because Verstappen obviously only has those 25 points from Jeddah in the bank, but Sainz could easily be up there too, so that will be interesting to see. And Ferrari looking very comfortable in the Constructors' Championship as well. So you had them, you had Perez coming in fourth, again, disappointing for him, having led the opening part of the race. George Russell, fifth for Mercedes, the best Mercedes finisher on the day. Not a lot said about him again, given the attention was on Lewis Hamilton, but I think, for George to make the most of the situation that they're in, make the most of the situation Mercedes are in, is quite crucial because, every point is going to count. They might not be in this championship battle with Ferrari and Red Bull, but, if they play their cards right, they could look at a good finish in the Constructors' Championship because they are sitting still a point ahead of Red Bull. Obviously, Red Bull playing catch-up after a double DNF, but, if they are supposedly the third fastest car or whatever, then, they could easily be knocking on the door of those top two on the days that they're not going to be as strong or if they have any problems. So we'll see how that all pans out. Meanwhile, we had a hilarious Hamilton down in P10. Unfortunately, it could have easily been 7th for him if it wasn't for the fact that we had that virtual safety car or if not just the virtual safety car, but the fact that the pit lane was closed at the time it was. Having the virtual safety car would have easily helped him come in and change tyres and then get back out there and not lose much time. But unfortunately, the pit lane was closed, so he had to wait till after that to get back out. And hilarious, I say, because after the race he said, is there even points for 10th or something? So very much unfamiliar territory for him, but a top 10 is a top 10. If you're Gunther Steiner and what he said apparently for 2 points last year he would have screwed the whole paddock or something like that, putting it likely. I don't know if that's the exact quote or whatever. I'm sure with that sort of mentality he'd be celebrating the fact that he finished in 10th, but unfortunately for him and Mercedes, it's not where they want to be, and they're going to be assessing what to do as the season goes on. Who knows if they bring any upgrades as well to the Australian Grand Prix next up. While we're on the topic of Haas and Gunther trying to screw people in the paddock, Kevin Magnussen, Q3 again, ace job for him, and then to finish 9th in the race. I mean, he went backwards, unfortunately, but to still finish 9th and pick up 2 points or whatever. I mean, that's more points than Haas have scored in the last 2 seasons, the 12 points that they're on currently. So what does that say about this team? It's so fascinating. A lot of people didn't expect it. They're like, oh, Williams will be ahead, or, Alfa Romeo more likely going to be ahead given the kind of season that Haas had last year. But that's also the impact that I reckon Magnussen has had on the team too. I mean, if they had the other guy in again, I think it would be a lot different. And Schumacher, unfortunately, as well, hasn't had the greatest start to his 2022 campaign. But he's only going to be pushed more by someone like Magnussen, who is relentless and has so much experience. So this is really good to see for a team that, for a while you thought they might not even be on the grid in the future, but they've committed to the end of the current Concord Agreement, and hopefully some success will come their way in terms of a solid midfield fight for this year. Behind Mercedes and George Russell there in 5th, we had Esteban Ocon again racing to the finish line like he did last year with Valtteri Bottas for the podium. Only this time he was racing with Lando Norris, and Ocon came out better to finish in 6th, but still a good result for Lando as well, for McLaren to get on the points board too. Again, they struggled in qualifying and all that sort of stuff. Daniel Ricciardo out in Q1, and then, of course, not being able to race, to the end with the failure that he had. Ricciardo actually got a grid penalty too, I forgot to say, for impeding during qualifying. So not the greatest of weekends for him again. whilst Lando just missing out on Q3 and ending up in the points. So good job for him. Looking elsewhere, Pierre Gasly, P8, so points on the board for him and AlphaTauri, but it was Yuki Tsunoda who this time suffered the same problem that Gasly did in Bahrain, and that actually happened on the outlap to the grid before the race, so Tsunoda didn't even get to start, so unfortunate for him. Already mentioned Bottas, Alonso, Latifi out of the race, Guan Yu Zhou finishing again in 11th, so getting to the line, that's best he could have done in that race and in that situation. And then behind him, you had the Aston Martins out of the points again, as well as Alex Albon. So the only thing I could say about those guys, not so much for Nico Hülkenberg, because we will have Sebastian Vettel back in the Aston Martin for the Australian Grand Prix, making his debut this season as well. But for the likes of Lance Stroll and Alex Albon, surely there's got to be an element of pressure that mounts. That applies to Nicholas Latifi as well. There at Williams, who would have thought that they would be in the position they are, considering Haas is so far up, and Alfa Romeo have been great in qualifying. They've been able to, with the help of Valtteri Bottas, of course, been able to get into Q3. You would have thought that Albon, with his speed as well, would be able to push for that, but unfortunately the car doesn't seem like it's there at the moment. But it could only be a matter of time before the pressure comes on. And I think for Aston in particular, once we get to see Vettel in the car next weekend, see how he goes, we could probably get a better judge, or we could better judge the situation they're in. But if he struggles as well, then then that's when you got to look at what's going on in the team, And you've heard me before talk a lot about Aston Martin and what they've invested in there. Is it going to end up as another Toyota F1 project from the 2000s or whatever? Who knows? But not looking good for them at this stage. So there's your race. There's your Saudi Grand Prix. Bit of jostling in Jeddah between the leaders there. So Leclerc sitting pretty with 20 points advantage over Verstappen at the moment. Of course, Verstappen playing catch up after the DNF in Bahrain. Otherwise, then it's pretty congested when you go into the midfield. Constructors' Championship, Red Bull rebounding after that first weekend. Only a point off Mercedes in second, but Ferrari are well ahead. Alpine leading Haas, and then Alfa Romeo. Those Ferrari-powered teams looking good. AlphaTauri in 7th, McLaren on the board in 8th, and then, you've got Aston and Williams sitting pointless at the moment in 9th and 10th. So those Mercedes-powered teams really suffering at the moment as it is. So, let's move it on. And one of the big announcements to come during the week as well was the fact that we're going to have a Las Vegas Grand Prix in 2023. Not much of a secret if you've been following the F1 news over the last few weeks. There's talks of kind of escalated, and then to the point where an announcement was made in such pomp as well, with Stefano Domenicali there and Greg Maffei, the CEO of Liberty Media itself, there too, because obviously the event is going to be promoted and bankrolled by Liberty rather than being put forward by a local promoter like most races are. So they're really hoping that it'll be a flagship event. It's the third race that we're going to have in the US as well as of next year, with Miami coming on the calendar. I don't know what to think of this one. Obviously people think back to the Caesars Palace Grand Prix that we had in the past, and how terrible a race that was. But they're obviously putting a lot of money into this one. They want it to succeed. They've got it there on the Las Vegas, on the main strip. I imagine ticket prices will be astronomical and will be sold out pretty much as soon as they go on sale. So who knows if that'll actually mean that a average Joe like me will be able to purchase it if I do intend to go to the race next November. It's most likely going to be on the weekend of Thanksgiving as well, but they haven't confirmed the date as yet. Seems like a pretty simple track. Seems like it's going to be a fast track or whatever. As I said last time, I don't understand this fascination that F1 has at the moment with street races. I prefer those old, fast flowing tracks. I don't like the Tilkedromes as much, but I like tracks with character. We've got how many street races now? You got Monaco, you got Baku, Singapore, Miami soon to be, Jeddah, of course, and then this one coming up in Vegas, and I thought Qatar as well was meant to be switching from the LaSalle circuit to a street race in the future as well. So, that's 7 races just off the top of my head that are street races. I mean, you could include Albert Park in that as well, but it is kind of a permanent parklands type circuit. But yeah, 7 of your 22 or 23 races are street tracks. So, in between that, there's races that you would love to see back on the calendar, such as, your German Grand Prix, whether it's Hockenheim or the Nürburgring. They're talking about taking a race back to Africa, the African continent, African continent, and I would probably love to see them go back to Kyalami there in South Africa. That's such a fun track as well. So, there's a lot at the moment for F1 to think about in terms of where we're going to race in the future. Does this mean with Vegas coming in next year that there's a race that's on the calendar this year that's going to miss out? Because you've got to factor in the fact that Qatar becomes a addition to the calendar next year. The Chinese Grand Prix will return as well, and so far there's only the Russian Grand Prix that's had its contract terminated. So who else is going to have their head on the chopping block? I hope it's not any of our favourite races for sure. And speaking of favourite races, the Australian Grand Prix, favourite because it is our home race. It's my home race here in Melbourne. It's going to be great because I didn't want my last memory of Albert Park and the Australian Grand Prix to be Friday the 13th of March in 2020 when the Grand Prix was cancelled. Having been there on the ground that day, having to cover it for the website, for the Raw, get the information out there as accurately as I could, was one of the most intriguing and difficult days I remember in covering Formula One, given how, just volatile the situation was. We're dealing with something that no one knew how to deal with at that point. The COVID, coronavirus, COVID-19, so new to everyone. We didn't have the measures in place to be able to protect ourselves, or, there was a stage where I was like, everyone in the paddock is probably going to get it. Am I going to be sick? When I leave and everything. It was genuinely one of those fearful situations. But now to be able to return, to have such a glowing undercard of support categories as well, such as the Supercars, S5000, Porsche Carrera Cup, full capacity for the weekend. They're still trying to sell some Friday tickets, but there's probably not that many left. They've made changes to the track as well. A multitude of corners have been widened. They've had their camber adjusted as well. No more chicane there at turns 9 and 10. Instead, that's more going to be like an extended straight, so it's going to be a lot quicker as well. Lap times could be as quick as a minute 15 seconds, if they do include that fourth DRS zone as well. So it's really, when you talk about the future of, having a race in your city or, at your venue or whatever, I don't think they would have spent this much money and time on the development that they have for Albert Park if they didn't foresee that the race was going to stay here for some time to come. So I love the intent there from the Australian Grand Prix Corporation, and hopefully Formula One itself will commit for the foreseeable future as well to Albert Park. And I myself just excited, I only found out on Friday that I would be going and representing the Raw as I do always. Going to be live blogging the race from the track and, hopefully catching up with friends that I haven't seen either for 2 years, basically since the start of the pandemic and everything. And just being amongst that atmosphere again will be really exciting. So, if you stay tuned to my social channels there on Instagram and Twitter as well, links are always in the Linktree in the description of the podcast. I'm sure you'll be able to experience or get an idea of what I'm experiencing during the week ahead and the weekend ahead. So we look forward to it. And let's round this one up with some supercars talk as well, with the Tasmania SuperSprint last weekend, round 2 of their championship here. And what else do you say than that there's a feeling of deja vu from last year, as Shane Van Gisbergen did a clean sweep of the weekend, winning all 3 races, which means he's won 5 of 6 races that we've had so far this season. He surpassed the record of 56 race wins as well. That was set by Scott McLaughlin and Garth Tander on the all-time winners list for supercars. Still a way to go till he reaches the top of that, which his old teammate and now team boss Jamie Whincup is still on top of. But the main sort of talking point coming out of the weekend was Van Gisbergen and his racing, and this is something that, it's quite contentious, because there's going to be people who are like, he's racing too hard, this is how Van Gisbergen is, he's so dirty, and, all that. But then there's going to be people who are like, okay, well, the onus is on the other guys to actually defend. Like if you look at the overtakes during race 3, which was the first race of the weekend, on Will Davison and Cameron Waters in particular, they just basically leave the door open. The only thing Waters did that was, you could not even commend him, but just, of note that Waters did in that instance was flip off at Giz. What's that going to do? That's just going to give him more motivation to do it again next time. He really muscled his way, having qualified 5th in that race. Waters was on pole. And at the end of the day, when he caught up, there was just no resistance. There was no defense from them. Yet we saw Waters being unnecessarily aggressive with Tim Slade during race 5 or 6, I think. Hang on. Race 4, sorry. The second race where he ended up getting punted off, did Slade, that is, because of Waters being unnecessarily aggressive. And unfortunately, it was not a good weekend for Tim Slade either. But, fighting for minor positions in that instance. So what was the point of that, where, you were fighting for the win and just let this guy pass? Same thing happened in the following race with Van Gisbergen, but with his new teammate in Brock Feeney. That's more understandable, the rookie, he doesn't want to get his hands dirty or anything like that. He led pretty well in the opening stint of the race, having taken the lead from his teammate at the start, and then we had that red flag with Andre Heimgartner and Jacques Lebrock coming off there at the final corner. But it's only a talking point because these guys are doing nothing. And that's easy for me to say, for example, from the outside looking in, but it looks as if, they could do more to defend against Van Gisbergen, to give him a bit of his medicine in return. Like, what happened to the rest of the field once Scott McLaughlin left? I mean, surely someone out there, thought, oh, well, one of us could have a go at the crown as well. Oh, no, wait, Van Gisbergen's going to do it. I'm just going to, just chill back here and maybe wait for Van Gisbergen to quit, and then I'll have a chance of winning or whatever. That's not going to happen, It was unfortunate for Chaz Mostert too, losing the championship lead on the first day there in Tassie. He qualified in 13th with a power steering issue, and then was on for good points in the race for P8, but there was a lap 37 incident between Mark Winterbottom and David Reynolds, which saw Chaz caught up as collateral, unfortunately, and then for the rest of the weekend he wasn't able to get any good results out of that car. So again, the whole consistency thing comes back into it, where you've got to be able to roll out at every track you go to and be able to qualify, top 5 at the most. You got to be inside that top 3, most likely, to be able to finish on the podium and win races, because that's the only way you're going to win a championship in this. But at the moment, 6 races in or whatever, 2 events in, and Van Gisbergen is looking pretty already at the top there with a 67-point lead over Anton De Pasquale. And speaking of Anton, where was the Shell V-Power team all weekend, apart from Davison early on? We only saw Anton feature in the final race there. I mean, he's doing well to keep himself out of trouble and not have any lose any points like he did last year with some DNFs. But the fact that isn't really challenging for wins at the moment, who knows? It's not looking too great as it stands. But it is a long season, of course. We're getting a proper full season this year for Supercars, so hopefully they're going to improve as the year goes on. And going to the next track, of course, for them is the Australian Grand Prix support round. It's a track that's been pretty good for the Mustangs in the past. The last time we were there in 2019, we did see Scott McLaughlin pretty much dominate and Chaz Mostert get a win as well when he was there with Tickford. So will it be the same story when we go there this time? But looking at the standings as they are, we've got Van Gisbergen ahead, 67 points to De Pasquale, 122 back to Davison in third. Mostert dropping to fourth with 145 points in arrears, and then Brody Kostecki in the top 5 with 175 points behind. So, yeah, they're going to have to get their act together, are these guys. But good on Brock Feeney this weekend as well. I think, we've got to talk about the rookie a little bit. There at Triple Eight, making his debut this season. He finished on the podium there in race 4. He did well to lead the race early on as well, and then, of course, Van Gisbergen bowled past or whatever. He wasn't going to put up any resistance for that, but that's kind of what we expected, or from Feeney this season, that he would come in and, get some good results here and there, but it's very much going to be a learning. It's not like he's too far off the pace or whatever. He still was able to qualify second in that race and to finish second and whatnot. So, it's going to be good watching this kid develop, and that's what we want to see, I mean, we saw likes of Cam Waters and Chaz Mostert, Scott McLaughlin, they all developed and whatnot and became race winners and championship contenders and all that. But, it's that important last step on becoming a championship contender that's quite important. So I'm sure with the team there at Triple Eight, Feeney will be able to do that in the future. Anyway, I think that about wraps it up, though. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in. As I said, keep an eye on the social channels for myself and for the podcast. You can find them with the Linktree that is always in the description below. I'm going to be doing a preview episode for the Australian Grand Prix with F1 Chronicle and Grid Talk as well, so keep an eye out for that as well. I'm sure I'll retweet that or repost that. But other than that, yeah, hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend. Enjoy the week ahead. Enjoy the Australian Grand Prix, and I will be back to review the race in over a week's time. Thank you.